get some input, see what other people are doing and see how markets have changed. Just get some different thinking for how I do it.
Good. Okay. George, background?
I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, East Bay, Alamo, and I've been in network 25 years. And I guess what else would be helpful?
Well, that kind of says it all. That's good.
Okay, good.
Chris?
Hey, Paul. Very new to this. Only been doing it for a couple months, basically. New to the network. Work with Doug Brown and Paradigm Associates. So I have a great base that I'm working from, but I'm open to hearing how people are doing it and learning as much as possible right now.
Good. Great to have you. And Mike?
So Mike Myers, aerospace and defense industry, graduated 3 years ago and joined Trusted Advisors. So I fiddled around with all of the kind of, I call them micro clients that you get from the chamber and from other similar organizations. And now I'm focusing on aerospace and defense. And so I like the idea of value pricing. I've always tried to value price, but I don't have a clear methodology yet. So I'd like to hear that.
Okay, good. That's helpful. Adam?
Hi, this is Adam Pressman of Leadership Shape. I am back into the fray, having been away from the RAC TAN world for a little while. I'm getting back into the content that you guys use as opposed to what I've been forced to use for the government agency I was supporting.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And Bob Kinney?
Hey, Paul, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, yeah, so Accelerate Results Group in Tampa, Florida, and I help, as the name implies, help companies with performance acceleration, aligning talent, using those Intermetrics tools, and then agile processes, the lean side, and then high growth marketing strategies from previous positions. So that's basically what I've been doing. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you. Okay, Tom, I know. Lauren, I know. Amy?
I'm with Doug and Chris, so whatever they say. I'm in New York City.
Oh God, don't do that.
Absolutely. I know my place in the paradigm.
Okay. And Bertha?
Don't do what Doug says. Good Lord.
Good afternoon. I missed the question.
How long with the network? Where is your business in terms of arc of development?
I have been with the network since 2016. I would say officially on enrolling for about a year and a half. And it's in stages. I would say I'm still in growth mode.
Okay, great. And Dr. Suri, do we have a photo there, or is that, is someone there? Wendy?
It's Surya. I'm not sure if he's got his phone off and video, mic off and video off.
Okay, all right. So obviously with the veterans we have on this line, please feel free to chime in. Anyone should chime in with questions, observations, anything that would help us all. I happen to think that pricing is extremely important and very difficult. Oh, there we go.
Oh, sorry, hold on. Hold on, my computer just went goofy.
Okay. And our objective today, obviously we can hear some stories here. There is no one size fits all. Pricing has to be right for you. It has to be right for you wherever you are in your development, and also your business. I think that pricing strategy should be consistent with your overall objectives and your strategy. Wendy, we can move on. So I think what we really want to keep in focus is what Drucker says: purpose of business, create and keep a customer. So pricing can fit into that. Because if it is part of your strategy, then long-term client relationships really become sensitive to where you begin the pricing. And I think that's some of the challenge for the newer people in terms of, there's a tendency to, oh, let me just get business and get started. Well, there could be a downside to that. If you price too low and that client becomes a long-term center of influence, referring other business to you, I don't know about the rest of the people, but it's not that easy to raise prices once you set the price. So you have to think going in, where do you want to begin this relationship? Wendy, you can go ahead. So in terms of service, I think what we do is probably, in my opinion, extraordinarily important pricing strategy, but it's also very difficult because you're talking about your time, your expertise. There's a lot of factors here for you to consider, and also the marketplace receives that in different ways, depending upon where you are, what market you're in. Are you industry specific? We heard a couple of examples, aerospace. We heard some things as we went around. And I think a big factor here, considering this, Wendy, you can go to the next, is really about your goals, your overhead, and how established you feel you are. Because there's a time and place for everything. And, you could be kind of where I'm at now is I would like to work less and earn more. So if you think of that, that could drive your pricing strategy in itself. I don't want to do business with everybody. And in a typical year, a good year for me might be 14 or 15 clients, top end. So it's not like you need a lot to be very successful in the business. I would love to hear that. That would be an interesting thing to just quickly go around the horn and hear a typical number of clients or projects per year. Anybody? Grant, you could start.
Well, I'm at a little different stage because I've been trying to cycle down a bit. But
right.
my typical load, if I'm operating alone, which is what I've done mostly in the past few years, is I can handle 5 clients. And my pricing scheme really, a few years ago, I moved to a subscription model, which is when after I sit down, I've been through fact finding and we lay out what needs to be done. And I'll say, here's what I can give you in terms of a ongoing program for this amount of monthly fee. I haven't been as fancy as saying this thing automatically renews after a year, those sorts of things. But we typically set a review point, either 6 months or a year out, about what do we do next. And so I thought when I went to the subscription model, if I said, all right, here's the scope of the contract, here's the price, that people would then call me twice as much as I thought perhaps was included. In other words, mission creep. Haven't had that at all. It's almost been the opposite. So the subscription model has worked really well. I often jokingly have said I have a two-tier pricing model, and that is free or expensive. So I do just for the community standpoint, I do a lot of sort of free advice. But the thing that is thinking of value pricing, my question has always been, how much is a key decision worth? In other words, if we could help a business leader make a critical decision that's going to double or triple that person's business, then how much is that worth? I haven't figured out that formula yet.
So when you describe subscription model, you really are talking about value pricing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And what you're talking about in terms of access, it's almost unlimited access. Call me 24/7, email.
No, I usually put some limits on that. It turns out that I have not had to limit things like phone calls and such. But, you know, in the recent case with a company, he had set growth objectives. And in order to meet those growth objectives, we went through a front-end strategic planning process. And it was clear that we needed to put in place a new organization structure. And we shifted to moving to that, to deliver that organization structure. And a few months ago, I said, we're going to finish this by the end of June. So the last Friday, he and I had a meeting that I delivered. Essentially, here's the finished organization plan. He and I had discussed every detail of it before I handed him the documents, but here's your blueprint. Go to it. And now, well, I'm basically on call, but the subscription is essentially, if we renew it, it has to be up for negotiation again. But within that is some delivery points. Yes.
Yeah, I've tried that with a few key clients, and I've had the same experience as you, Grant, that I'm amazed how little they call.
Yeah.
Anybody else have that experience or have tried that model and could give us feedback?
Oh, it's Linda, contrary to what my name tag says. We have, I'd say 5 or 6 clients. We have two that are on monthly retainer. And we have outlined, as Grant said, we have outlined what that means and what that looks like. And we have several others who are on like a quarterly plan. And what we do, because since our focus is mostly small businesses, as opposed to you guys, which are doing a little bit of the bigger folks, we lay out the plan for the year and say, this is what's going to happen. And this is what's included, and explaining to them that if there's extra stuff that, you know, we will charge you for it, but this is what you get for the money. And that has worked really well for us. Now, how that came about was obviously an initial project with a client, and whether it be strategic planning or, you know, whatever that looks like. A lot of them were strategic planning. And when we set that out, it's like, we'll do the plan, but then we're going to have monthly meetings after we do the plan, you know, so we kind of get them on the hook so they never want us to go away. And then we'll usually propose an annual goals review and, you know, a few other things, but that has worked well for us.
Good, good. Maybe for the newer people, I should kind of wade in. We're referencing value pricing and some of the different things. So maybe I should kind of walk through some of the different pricing terms. Wendy, you could hit. So I think particularly for the newer people that are on the call, I think it can be overwhelming in terms of the number of strategies, and also the fact that no one job is the same. It really becomes, you know, an estimate at best. And for those who are in the beginning, I'll throw myself under the bus and say, in the first year or 18 months, we all have to make this kind of mistake, and that is to chase a piece of business. And let me ask this question to everyone on the call. Did you ever win a project, and then after you got the project, wish you had never won that business? I see a lot of heads nodding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what we want to avoid, but you probably will have to do this once, and then you learn. And I had one where I put what I thought was a really aggressive price tag on it at the time, which was $12,000. I thought, wow, that's really good if I could get $12,000. Then I started the project, and a third of the way into the project, I realized that, number one, I wasn't going to be able to complete this by myself. I was going to have to bring in a subcontractor, which added to my cost. And then it was just way underpriced. And it forced me to finally have some sleepless nights and go back to that client and say, I'm going to have to charge you more. And it was a difficult road to go. And you learn from that. No one job is the same. So when you put this together, try to think of the fact that you're probably going to make a mistake, and it's not the end of the world. I'm still here, and you survive it and move on. Though I will say,
so Paul, just excuse me, sorry for interrupting, but
no, please.
I think it's important to ask the question, who am I? In other words, what really is your business? And so hand in hand with the pricing structure, it goes back to the time when a lot of us were talking about becoming a trusted advisor. And so that's the way I've been positioning myself. And of course, it's easier for somebody to position themselves there if you're in an older age bracket and you're not 23, I guess. But my pricing structure is in line with that approach. So I don't look at myself as going in and doing executive leadership, for instance, and leaving. If I become a trusted advisor and it looks like within the company we need to do executive leadership, then we do executive leadership. And in cases where we add programs to the contract, then I have a provision that we can add those, and there's an incremental cost for those things if it's beyond the scope of the things we talked about. And so what are some of the dangers to that approach? One danger is that you become embedded in the company, and therefore you may feel like you're a quasi-employee, and can you be objective enough? People say there's a danger to that. The advantage, of course, is that you really understand the company and its needs, and you can respond accordingly. I prefer to take that risk, and so therefore get pretty close to the clients.
Mm-hmm. It is a balance, though, isn't it?
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, it's a fine line. And again, I don't think there's any one answer to that. I think each relationship varies and each project varies. Like yourself, Grant, I always try to achieve that status. And so far it's worked quite well. And in some cases, they consider me a member of the family. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that lightly here in New Jersey.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So, Wendy, move on. Let's take a look, because I do want to get some of these pricing strategies out because of my trigger thought. This often is used at the beginning. It's called a market penetration strategy. And that's really just starting out low and then grow as the demand increases in your business. So, I mean, that's kind of a common sense approach. And again, like Grant's saying, you have to know, who am I? Where do you see this going? How long do you intend to operate? And are any of these accounts still going to be with you? What if this account is still with you 10 years from now? That's the good news. The bad news could be if you're charging minuscule rates, it could be a problem. So you have to think about that. Wendy, just throw another one up there. Then you have the cost plus, which often, depending upon your background and what kind of industry you come from, this is taking a look at your materials, your time, travel, what kind of research is going to go into this, and then you tack on your margin or profit. So that's a cost plus strategy. By the way, these are not in any kind of rank order. These are just, I'm just putting them out there for our thoughts. Okay, competitive pricing is kind of looking at the marketplace and seeing what others are charging. You could be doing that on a call like this, or actually go into the marketplace and try to get a feel. And I'm sure over the years you've all heard things anywhere from, Herdlinger, when I started, was 5,000, and I've heard people 7,500, 10,000 for leadership. But it's really, where do you want to fit in? Do you want to be below the market, at the market, above the market? It's back to Grant's comment: who am I, and how does this fit into my business model? Next. Then you have the hourly based, just looking at time put into it. Are you going to ascribe, when you're doing your estimates, are you going to put a dollar value on what an hour of your time is? The problem with this is I always look at the hour and say, okay, I'm really not charging you for the hour. What's an investment here is the past 40 years of experience is what I'm really charging you for, and how do we put a dollar amount on that? So you have to find the balance of hourly versus really trying to get that experience in there. Next, Grant mentioned this one. This is value-based in terms of, yes.
It's interesting when you take a look at hourly, depending on whether you're talking about private sector or public sector, that can play out differently.
Yes.
For example, here in New Jersey towns are used to paying $1 an hourly rate, and it tends to be, all the towns tend to be in and around the same rate in terms of kind of what will make it past township committee. Right. So I suspect that if you move too much beyond that, you might really create all kinds of holy hell for yourself. So while I'm not a big believer in competitive pricing a lot, if you want to get certain segments, you probably understand kind of what the market is used to.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, Doug, you're probably familiar through Mike in terms of the construction business, which is totally bid driven and exactly what you're talking about. I mean, there are some specific pricing in the municipalities and the businesses you're going after, and you really need to know what that is. I mean, it's you can push it a little bit, but you can't get that far out of line knowing what the market is.
Yeah, if they're used to paying X amount of dollars for a high-end municipal law firm, I think you're going to find some resistance to charging 3 times what they're used to paying for a high-end municipal law firm. Exactly.
So you need to know that. You need to have that information in order of structuring it. And okay, next one, I said there's no particular order, but I guess if I had a favorite or a bias, it would be bundle pricing. And what I mean to that is probably if Gerard were on this call, he knew that a breakthrough for me was when I went from one-to-one coaching to group coaching. And by that, I mean that the clients would give me 4, 5, 6, 7 project managers to put through leadership. So if I were pricing $7,000 for one to coach, and now to the same organization, you could give me 4 for 18 or 19,000. Would that be attractive if you were the client? So that was, for me, that was the bundle that made a difference about 5 or 6 years ago in my business. That was a breakaway, because from a standpoint of inventory control and my time utilization, I greatly expanded my inventory by doing that, because I was spending the same hour with 5 people as I was spending for 1, but getting considerably more return from the investment of the client. So that's one of the ways I look at bundle. It's a great way to upsell. And then you could consider combining, leadership development, assessment, dialogue. And I think I heard a couple, Grant was talking about his pricing strategy, that he puts certain things in there. Anything like that is bundling. Who else has a story that bundle pricing has worked for them? No? Doug?
Well, I mean, when we first started a gazillion years ago, there wasn't much in the way of individual coaching. It was either targeted classes,
Oh yeah,
or it was corporate sales. So when you start to think about that, almost all the corporate sales tended to be bundled.
right.
And I got to admit, I don't know who first shared this with us, but we found that if we, just in terms of what we said on the pricing page, that if we said up to X number of participants for such and such a dollar, it saved an awful lot of pain and suffering over the long haul. Because sure enough, as soon as somebody said, well, you price it for 11, they said, oh, by the way, we've just hired somebody and we'd like to put them in your process. And you give them a bill for $1,800 for the extra person, and they go, what? What are you talking about? Clearly, you're not trying to convince me that there's $1,800 more materials costs associated because I've added somebody to the mix here. What's going on? And then you start saying, well, it's kind of like college. If you enroll more people, there's a tuition per. They say, yeah, well, you're not Harvard, so sharpen the pencil and let's have a different conversation. And that's what I just found, that if we rounded it up, and my old rule of thumb was rounded up 10%. If you were talking about 27 people, up to 30 participants, and add the equivalent of 1.5 more people. If they never add them, you're ahead of the game. If they've added 1 to 2, you're pretty much breaking even. If they add up to 3, well, you've taken a little bit of a haircut, but you haven't gotten in an argument, and you've kept the customer.
That's interesting. So since I was coming from a different era, I experienced it the other way. But I hear what you're saying, that, and I've had that happen where, you could look at it both ways. I hear what you're saying, but I also had, in the case of facilitation, I found that, I didn't want to add too many people. So I kind of put a limit at like 8 or 9. And when clients came back and started pushing that, for me, that was more difficult, even though it was attractive to add, like you said, the 1,800 or 2,000. I guess I was using it as a negative sell. I was trying to limit that 8 was max, and I'm not going to save them for the next cycle or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But since you were coming from the industry when you did group or targeted facilitation, it was the reverse.
So if we're talking about value pricing, how do you calculate the value? George is on the phone, I think, on the call. And George, I think, uses specific value pricing for process improvement.
What I do is I charge 25% of the benefit. So if the particular project's $100,000 value or benefit the client's going to get, my rate's 25% of that, and that gives them a 4-year payback. And in most companies, if they're industrial companies, they're used to paying or they're used to calculating what they pay for something based on the payback and the internal rate of return.
Does anyone else?
Do you ever have any trouble getting them to calculate that?
What I do, Grant, typically is I ask them to have their finance person calculate the benefit.
Mm-hmm. Good.
George, can you share with us, what does that look like? What does that calculation look like?
It's, Doug, it's just a straight percentage. If they tell me that the benefit's going to be $100,000, then I take the 25% of $100,000.
And that's calculated after the work is done?
No, going in. Sometimes I ask for an upside for myself if they think, or an upside to my fee. it kind of depends on how clear they are on the benefit is and what the potential is. Sometimes they come back with a range that if it goes well, it could be $100,000. However, there appears to be $500,000 opportunity, but it's going to be a little more difficult to get that. So I guess I'm flexible is the right way to express what I do. But the base is the 25% of the benefit. And
George,
go ahead.
do you have a cutoff low? In other words, if somebody came back and says, well, we think the benefit's $10,000, you know, would you say, no, I can't do anything for you?
I guess it depends how big a load I have in my practice. If I feel that it's going to stretch me too thin, I won't go for something that is not living up or not meeting my needs and what I think the value should be.
Yeah, thanks.
This is Adam. I once proposed doing a cost and waste reduction, TQI stuff. And I said, I'll take half of what I save you. And the guy said, no, you're giving me a fixed fee because if you're that confident, there must be some real money lying on the floor. And he was right, so I had to come up with a more competitive fee alone in that case. But that's a great way to pad your, to get a competitive or compelling fee for yourself.
You had done the assessment before you said that.
Yeah. Not a particularly expensive one either. It was pretty easy to see.
That's an attention getter, huh?
Yeah. So we do a lot of ISO 9000 work for people. It becomes really easy to figure out how fast the money runs up if they're not aligned. So, it's a back of the napkin calculation can bring a compelling figure.
That's great. It's a good example. Lauren, are you going to chime in here with anything?
Nope, I'm good. I probably go after the market penetration theory. And yes, I have, I'm starting to use bundling in that I am combining phase 1 and phase 2 coaching with the further ongoing coaching. So I'm using a little bit of a couple different theories.
Yeah, and I think that's a common practice that, we're probably going to do a combination of these things, not just one strategy per se, even though we're hearing several with the value pricing. I think for many of us, it's probably a combination of some of these things that you get involved with. Wendy, you could move me past bundle.
Well, can I?
Yes.
Slip in a comment. This is Tom. Some of you might remember Paul Savage, who was in the network years ago. And I learned some really valuable things about pricing from stories I heard from Paul. And so, first of all, it's a wonderful thing when you can get paid for fact finding. And so what Paul did is he took what I call the Godshaw questions. There's about 6 questions, just kind of an organizational, but if you ran the company, what would you do? Who do you work for? Somewhere I have the list, and a lot of you probably do too. Anyway, he would get referred into a business owner, and he would say, you know what? I can learn some things about what's going on here that you can't. Why don't you let me survey your people? And I will come back with a report that I can almost guarantee will be extremely insightful. And so the business owner would say that in the first instance, they said, well, gee, what would you charge for that? And I believe he started and he said, well, $3,600. And so he did it and he wrote up the report. And he saw how much value and how the report was valued. And so we went to the next one, and the question, well, gee, how much would you charge for this? And he said, well, $5,000. And he got paid, and he did it, and did a few more, and then the question came up again, and I think he got up to like $8,000 for doing the same thing he was going to do, and he got paid for fact finding, and he just found looked at the elasticity of the whole pricing thing. So, gee, if you can get paid for fact finding, and it's how much courage do you have? And he was going to mid-sized businesses, so he had some idea that they could afford it, but he had a much better idea that they could afford it once they actually wrote him those checks.
Great story. And often, doesn't the pricing come down to that? What you think you're worth?
Oh yeah, I mean, you need to have the courage to ask. It took me a long time.
I always like to say, if you don't value your time, no one else will. So it really starts with you. This whole discussion, these are some different concepts. The tiered is very similar to the bundle, but it might be on a specific process. It could be different ways of slicing this, steps, variations on the bundle. Wendy, to the point of what Tom was just talking about, go to the next one. We've all heard about the amygdala and the lizard brain and where decisions are made. Many studies have been done about pricing and the choice that's made, the difference between 1995 and 2000. And how people respond to that. Has anyone had any experience or pricing around those strategies that either has worked for them or has backfired? Because I think there is risk to the psychological pricing, but I would love to open it up and again, just hear from the group. We have so many members here that could really shed some stories like Tom just did.
Tom, what did you mean by 1995 pricing versus 2000 pricing?
So the studies show that even though the difference could be very small, psychologically, those break points make a difference. That people,
you're talking about dollars?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it could be $9,990 or $10,000, things like that. Anybody had any stories or experience with that kind of psychological pricing?
In a similar note, if you do, I'd love to find out if you've ever priced something $9,657.43 for one of our processes.
This is Phil in Chicago. I found that the number 7, if I go in at, for depending on the program, 6,700, 77, 87, 97, I've never had a no when I've added N and a 700.
No way.
Lucky 7.
You're telling me that now after 35 years? Wow.
But if I'm looking at, like, say, 6,300, I'll push it to 67. Nobody has ever argued. If I go to like 6,900, in my own mind, okay, somebody just set the number. It's like 6,700. It's not too high. It just works.
Interesting.
Feels like a compromise, maybe. I don't know. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. To Doug's example, I like that because when you do an estimate, you probably do have a process that you go through with time, material, travel, and you have a calculation. And not always the 7, but I find that odd numbers, coming in with not a round number, but an odd number, it kind of speaks to the fact that you have sharpened the pencil and you've really put some thought behind this. So, Phil, maybe the magic of 67 or 9,700 speaks to that and has given you confidence to ask for that number.
Well, it also speaks to the math. if you do an even number, most clients are going to take a look at it hourly, no matter if you price it that way or not. They're going to put a pencil to it. So put a pencil to a prime number like 7.
Right.
As far as psychological pricing goes, I think that, back to the basics, people buy on emotion and justify on logic. I find that if I fail to get the emotion out, there's a high chance that regardless of how good the price is and how much they're going to get at it, they probably will pass. That getting the emotion out is crucial, at least for me.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And as we say in the sales process, they buy you first or they buy nothing at all. Really a critical factor. And that, George, speaks to the emotion, I believe, in terms of how you connect with the client.
So I was trying to think about this psychological pricing with respect to my typical approach. I almost always start with the assessments. Meet somebody at a networking event, runs a company, compare notes on what each of us does. And so one of the things that we do is we have an individual set of assessments that's really proved pretty successful for us. And love to have you take it. Would you like to take it? It's free for you. And if the person says yes, I set it up, and then the person takes the assessments, and we have a hour and a half or 2 session, which amounts to a fact-finding session in addition to getting to know them. But at the end of that, I know the person's strengths and vulnerabilities, what the person is concerned about, what the business looks like. The typical next step is, well, what about your staff? How about if we do this with your staff? And then move to the direct reports, come back with a report that says, here's what we learned, and here's some things that I think we need to be thinking about. And the next step might be strategic planning. It might be executive leadership. It might be anything. But essentially, if I'm trying to develop the trusted advisor stage, then to me, that process, first of all, number 1 on my sales list is develop trust. And I guess you have to make a favorable impression to go there, but favorable impression is getting them to take the assessment. So when, usually at the end of that, after you've done the staff, then you can say, look, based on where you've decided we need to go, then let me present a program for you.
Now, I know a lot of people use the assessments at no charge, like Grant just described. Has anyone experienced any risk with that?
I've done both, this is Adam, and I found that it worked. People take it more seriously if they paid for it.
Yeah.
Now, they can pay for it in a number of ways. You can credit them the price of it if they move forward on a process, et cetera, and they know that up front. So even though they know they're going to get it for nothing, effectively, they still value it more. They pay more attention, et cetera. Because there's so many online personality tests you can take for free that I think psychologically we get bundled into another one of those, particularly because it is an online assessment. And, it looks like all the others they take that are really just collecting their information for Facebook. But, if we can separate ourselves by having a price for it. The other things, I've done them for like candidate screening and stuff. So I've done just assessments, and I charge by literally sell them to say a recruiting company or a search firm. I'm not going to do any other work for them. So in that case, sure, I'll sell them. But people will pay more attention to them. I think psychologically pricing, the bigger win is framing, which is a psychological term for establishing a higher price and coming in lower. Like on my page, it says companies spend millions for this and you get it from me for $20 a day. That's framing. You stick one number in their mind and you come in with a much lower number. And I think that's probably more significant than the 97 versus 99 versus a round number kind of thing, if that helps.
Absolutely. I like that, and I like the framing example, and I've done that. What you suggest in terms of, look, here's what it cost. If you proceed with us, we'll have that included in the package. If you decide not to, we're going to charge you whatever, $295 or $395. We'll send you an invoice for that. And
so if I charge the CEO a fixed fee for the assessment, I've already established I'm a per piece or per unit pricer. And so I want to avoid that. I'm trying to become a trusted advisor, not to sell assessments or programs.
Yeah. Hear you. And that's why you do 5 clients a year. You have a model where that works. It depends. Yeah. It's not one size fits all.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
People take different approaches with it.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
Just to talk both sides of that. I got to admit, over the years, I've done some individual pricing of assessments. Kind of where Grant is, I find unless I've already got unless I've got a reason of what I'm going to package that along with, that I find similar to Grant, that you have a tendency to be, I found myself being pigeonholed on that. The other thing that I'll never do is that I'll never lowball a project figuring that I'm going to get my foot in the door and then raise the fee on subsequent projects. I have never found that to work.
Right.
It's like, oh, okay, so this development process is 10,000, and for your next group, it's 19.5. Man, they have a hard time. It's like, well, wait a minute, they have a hard time with that. I've had a hard time with that value proposition. Now,
that's
just
framing.
The way that may be the way I'm positioning it, but man, that has not worked well for me over time. I'm better off just kind of coming clean with, hey, this is what I think the process is really going to be, and this is the things that are included in it, and and now I'll do some things like I'll talk about the fact that the review process, we're going to do follow-up sessions so that goals set become goals achieved, and then the process is going to be closer to a year in terms of duration versus, 8 weeks or something along those lines. I will make sure that I understand my words pretty carefully there. But boy, I've gotten burned too often with coming in at a low ball and then trying to change pricing midstream, not midstream, but kind of on the next go round. Adam, did you want to comment on that?
I just said that is framing. You just found you've been a victim of framing. You set the value the first time,
right?
And you can never get out of that. So that's why you have to frame very high and then work up from it. And none of these strategies are going to be right for every situation, for every person.
Right.
Right. That's the whole point of obviously sharing so many of them, is that we can pick and choose for like a palette until we get the right presentation.
Right. It's not one size fits all. Wendy? And therefore, only you can ascertain what is right for you. And it can change as your business evolves. What you're doing today may not be what you're doing 5 years from now. And, it sounds like, Grant has taken his business to a whole nother level. And I think that it has to align with your objectives. And that question that Grant gave right off the bat, who am I? You ascertain that, you define your business and your strategy. It's part of your overall strategy. And you heard so many examples here today in terms of how people slice it and dice it and move. I love Adam's example of framing. A couple things I'm going to recommend. My sons gave us a gift over the holiday for Christmas of the master class. How many of you have heard of the master class?
Yeah.
And there's a guy on there. Of course, as a history buff, I love the Doris Kearns Goodwin stuff because I've read all her books. but I discovered this guy, Chris Voss. Anybody out there know who Chris Voss is?
With him.
Okay. So Chris Voss was an FBI hostage negotiator for 25 years. And what he did is he left the FBI and he wrote a book. And the title of the book is Don't Split the Difference. And it's about negotiating. And Adam, he actually has a term. He has a couple terms. He has mirroring and he has framing as a term. So it's kind of like that 800-pound gorilla in the room. Framing is identifying that and saying, it seems that this is very high for you or whatever. It seems that you're uncomfortable with what I'm saying. My experience in negotiation and pricing is no one values that which comes too easy. So in the whole process, whatever you do, whether you use the framing example or wherever you begin with this or however you paint it, just remember the fact that the client, if the client, I mean, you've all been there, I've been there, if the client says, this looks great, let's do it, it means that you probably came in too low. And I would agonize about that. You know, if it's too easy, you're probably not pushing the envelope. And most of us, I've met most of you through the events, and you're all very nice people, and not everybody comes from sales or businesses where you would be negotiating. And there's a tendency to think that if we're just fair and nice, the client will pay what is reasonable. But understand in business, first lesson my father-in-law gave me when I started in his office in Paramus, and having been in the corporate world, NBC and big companies, I was a little apprehensive about this business thing on your own. And he gave me one sentence: Paul, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And I've lived with that ever since. So with your pricing, really take into consideration, what are your goals and what do you want to get out of this? So we have some minutes left, and I want to throw it open to the group. Oh, one more. I have a suggestion, Wendy. There's one. In researching and preparing for this, I found a terrific tool from HubSpot. I don't know how many of you are familiar with HubSpot, but they actually, for those who would be into this, they actually have a free calculator, which you can go in and look at your pricing model and take any of these strategies and plug them into the calculator. So it looked interesting, so I wanted to share that with you. Comments, other suggestions, any stories? We have time for another good story.
I would share that I hope everybody has read Robert Cialdini's Influence. Leaving aside the pricing piece of it, it's just a really wonderful way to get people's attention when you're facilitating. I mean, you're influencing. That's the goal of the sale, plus, of course, the negotiation. It's very valuable there, and that's where things like framing are discussed at some length.
Excellent.
Hey, Paul, with your permission, and if Amy cooperates,
yes,
I just got her attention. Amy, would you talk a little bit when you were selling for BBC and you cracked the Walmart account? What kinds of things did you need to do when you were selling a couple of $1 million or $1 billion worth of stuff to Walmart? Amy, you're on mute.
Yeah, you have to unmute.
There we go. My issue is I always hate selling. I hate selling, come from England, hate selling. Don't tell me what I need. So I never tell people what I think they need. I ask them, what do they need? Consultative selling, which served me very well when I was selling Revlon in Harlem and the South Bronx and South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Jersey, London, when I was with Sony, because my philosophy is you want people, it's relationship building. And there was a title about 10 years ago called Planet Earth that came out that blew up the entire entertainment market. It just happened to be a BBC product. And before that, our business was around, 60 million a year. I was in specific accounts that would have a wide range according to who the clientele was, what they wanted, what the customers wanted, what could grow with them, but what was palatable to them. And with Walmart, you have to be very careful about pricing. You have to be very careful about inventory, because if you go in big. You manufacture to go in big, because that's what Walmart is. And there was a little account called Costco who tested the product, and because of when it came out, it blew up. They did $30 million of one title. It was embarrassing. Costco will only keep you in stock as long as it sells. We were in there for 3 years with this one title because it did so well. And then it was just sharing that information with other accounts. Walmart took Planet Earth, did pallets in 3,000 stores. It was amazing. They then came back and said, okay, we want more BBC. And I went, no. Not right for your demographic, not the right timing, not the right pricing. Make the money in the area that sells and know more about the client, the clientele, and what's going to work for them. Does that help, Doc?
It does. I see Paul nodding his head, so he got something out of that conversation too.
Because again, when I was in South Dakota and we had a lipstick range of Bright Frost Red Revlon New York lipstick, I said to my boss, not here, not going to sell here. But if you've got extra creamy foundation and skincare for the winter, I'll take every single piece you have. South Dakota winter, we need moisturizer. We do not need bright, sparkly lipstick because it didn't fit with the demographic. So it's finding what sells and gently nudging to build the pie, but make sure that it's a bigger pie, not you get a bigger piece of the pie, because all ships rise, and then you'll go back and they will trust you. Why would I sell you something you don't want, don't need, and not going to have any use for? I sell you something you want, you need, and you find the value in it, then you'll come back as I'll be a trusted advisor.
Thank you, Amy.
That's a great example. You know, the flip side of that is when I go in and do a needs assessment and start the process, at a certain point, I always ask myself a question. And the question is, can I help this person? Can I help this client? And sometimes the answer is, this is not my wheelhouse. And, you know, I'll either reach out to one of you guys or somebody else, accountants, lawyers. You know, I had a construction client was getting into when you go from one generation, succession planning. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I can help in leadership, I can help in things, but this was way out of my wheelhouse. And obviously I sent a lawyer in, I sent an accountant in to help them in that planning because it's not my area. So you need to know that, which I think your story is an example of that, making sure it's the right fit and the right thing, not just selling merchandise. Great story. Tom, you always have a big story from Chi-Town. What's happening? Tell us something from the South Side.
Well, I'm on the northern suburbs, actually a little closer to Milwaukee. I was waiting for Phil to share his 7 story because he told me that about, I don't know how long ago, Phil, about 5 years ago. Now that said, I unbundle for coaching projects, and I go in phases. And for me, the unbundling allows me to close things over the phone because I was at 1,700 for phase 1. Now I'm at 1,800 for phase 1. So, you know, it's getting paid for fact finding. And in fact, the assessment debriefing is the MRI. And something I got from George, prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. Well, why not get paid for diagnosis? Mm-hmm. And so I don't give them away. It's rare, on rare occasions, I will give away an assessment. I go in for 5 or 6 sessions with assessment debriefings and wherever else the discussion goes. Now I have a diagnosis, and now we can come up with the prescription.
I guess I should clarify that I don't give away anyone but the one to the CEO or the leader. That's it. So after that, it's paid all the way. But I consider that is just getting me in the door.
Right.
And the rest goes from there. Somebody walks in from the street
Absolutely. Good example. Wendy, anything you want to say to send us into the world again?
Just want to say thank you for your time. I appreciate you spending the day together with us.
And I would say,
yes.
Wendy, I have a question for you. If you could just hang for a minute after we close out this meeting.
Sure.
Thank you, babe.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Thanks.
and so don't go out in the cold without
Safe.
any clothes because you'll turn green based on his statue.
What?